The abandoned warrior. The battlefield was silent now, but the smell of blood and smoke still filled the air. Bodies of fallen soldiers, both human and alien, were scattered across the burned ground. The war between the Sci-Fi Empire and the United Earth Forces had lasted for years, and this battle was one of the worst. The once great city was nothing but ruins, its towers broken, its streets covered in ash. Among the wreckage, a large figure lay motionless. General Xalrax of the Sci-Fi Empire, a warrior feared across the galaxy, was now nothing more than a broken body on the ground. His 4 powerful arms, once capable of crushing enemies, were useless. His legs were paralyzed, his body shattered from the blast of an enemy missile. He was still alive, but barely. The Sci-Fi believed in strength. The weak were not worthy of survival. Rax knew this. He had trained his soldiers to leave behind the wounded, to abandon those who could no longer fight. That was the way of his people. And now his own army had done the same to him. He had watched them leave. His second-in-command, Commander Vextal, had given him one last glance before turning away. "You were a great warrior once, General," he had said, "but the Empire has no place for the crippled." Then they were gone. Xalrax had never felt fear before. He had faced death many times, but never like this. He was alone, helpless, and soon the enemy patrols would come, searching for survivors to finish off. The sound of footsteps made him tense. A shadow moved between the ruins. It was not Sci-Fi. It was a human soldier. Xalrax recognized the uniform of the United Earth Forces. He had killed many of them before. They were smaller, weaker, but their tactics and strategy had always been dangerous. The human moved carefully, scanning the battlefield with a rifle in hand. His armor was scratched and burned, his movements slow, but his eyes were sharp. Sergeant Daniel Hayes was the last survivor of his unit. Daniel had lost his team in the ambush. He had seen his friends fall, one by one. Now he was alone, searching for any survivors, friend or foe. His gaze fell on Xalrax. The alien warrior met his eyes, expecting death. The human had every reason to kill him. Xalrax had led countless attacks against Earth's forces. He had ordered the destruction of entire colonies. He was the enemy. But Daniel didn't pull the trigger. Instead, he crouched down, staring at the massive alien body before him. Xalrax was nearly twice his size, his armor cracked, his breathing heavy. "You're still alive," Daniel muttered. Xalrax growled, trying to push himself up, but his body refused to move. He was completely at the human's mercy. "Go ahead," Xalrax spat. "Kill me." Daniel didn't answer right away. He looked around, checking for enemy patrols. They would be here soon. He could hear their drones in the distance, scanning for life. He sighed. "Not my style," he said. Before Xalrax could respond, Daniel grabbed him under the arms and started pulling him across the battlefield. Xalrax was shocked. What are you doing?" "Saving your life," Daniel grunted, struggling to move the alien's heavy body. "Why?" Xalrax snarled. His own people had abandoned him. This human had no reason to help. Daniel didn't stop moving, because leaving people behind is wrong. "And right now, you're a person." Xalrax couldn't believe what he was hearing. This human was risking his life for him. A Sci-Fi. A low humming sound filled the air. Daniel froze. His heart pounded. He turned his head and saw an enemy patrol drone hovering above the ruins. Its red scanners swept across the battlefield, searching for survivors. If it spotted them, they were dead. Slowly, Daniel lowered himself and Xalrax behind a pile of rubble. He held his breath, gripping his rifle. The drone hovered closer, scanning the area, its metal body reflecting the red glow of its sensors. Xalrax watched in silence. If they were found, Daniel could still run. He could leave the alien behind and escape. But Daniel didn't move. The drone paused, then moved on. Daniel exhaled in relief. Close one. He looked down at Zalrax. We need to keep moving. Zalrax studied him, his mind full of questions. This was not how war was supposed to be. Enemies didn't save each other. But this human was different. For the first time in his life, Zalrax wondered if everything he had believed about humans was wrong. Daniel pulled him up again, dragging him toward safety. But the danger was far from over. Escape through fire. The battlefield was a graveyard of steel and bodies. Smoke curled into the sky, mixing with the distant sound of explosions. The war between the Sci-Fi Empire and the United Earth Forces had left this city in ruins, and now only ghosts of the fallen remained. But amidst the silence, two figures moved, one dragging the other, both desperate to survive. Sergeant Daniel Hayes gritted his teeth as he pulled the massive, paralyzed form of General Zalrax across the scorched ground. The Sci-Fi warrior was twice his size, his armor heavy and cracked, his breathing slow but steady. Every movement was a struggle. Daniel's muscles burned with effort, but he refused to stop. "You're heavier than you look," Daniel muttered, adjusting his grip. Zalrax let out a low growl, his pride wounded more than his body. "I told you, leave me. My people abandoned me. You have no reason to waste your strength on me." Daniel didn't stop. His boots crunched over shattered glass and broken stone. The sounds of enemy patrols grew closer. He had no time for an argument. "Yeah, well," Daniel grunted, "I don't like quitting." Zalrax didn't understand this human. The weak were meant to be left behind. That was the law of war. That was the way of the Sci-Fi. Yet this human, his enemy, was carrying him, dragging him towards some kind of shelter. It made no sense. Ahead, Daniel spotted the remains of a half-destroyed bunker, its steel doors barely holding onto their hinges. It wasn't much, but it was cover. If they could make it inside, they'd have a chance to hide from the enemy patrols hunting for survivors. But the path was dangerous. Drones hovered in the sky, their red scanners sweeping across the ruins. If they were detected, reinforcements would arrive within minutes. Daniel's grip tightened around his rifle. He took a slow breath, scanning for a safe route. The bunker was 50 meters away. A long stretch of open ground lay between them. "Okay," he whispered. "This is gonna suck." He adjusted Zalrax's weight, crouched lower, and started moving fast. Every step sent pain shooting up his legs. Every breath felt too loud. He kept his eyes locked on the bunker, his pulse hammering against his ribs. Zalrax could feel the strain in the human's body, the exhaustion in his movements. He had seen human soldiers before. Most of them were weak compared to Sci-Fi warriors. But this one, he was something else. They reached the halfway point. Then disaster struck. A high-pitched beep filled the air. Daniel's eyes snapped upward. One of the patrol drones had stopped midair. Its sensors flickered, recalibrating. Then, with a sharp mechanical click, its scanning beam locked onto them. "Shit," Daniel hissed. A loud siren echoed through the ruins. The drone's red lights turned blue, a signal for nearby enemy troops. They had been spotted. Daniel didn't think. He dropped to one knee, lifted his rifle, and fired. The shot ripped through the drone's casing. Sparks exploded as the machine spiraled downward, slamming into the rubble. Smoke rose from its broken shell. For a brief moment, silence returned. Then, in the distance, metallic footsteps. Zalrax heard it too. A distinct clanking sound, heavy and deliberate. His reptilian eyes narrowed. "Hunter-killers," he rasped. Daniel's stomach twisted. He had heard stories about them. Sci-Fi mechanized hunters, designed to track and eliminate survivors. They were fast, deadly, and worst of all, relentless. "We need to move. Now." Summoning the last of his strength, Daniel hauled Zalrax onto his back. The weight was unbearable, but adrenaline pushed him forward. He stumbled toward the bunker, every step in agony. The sound of shifting metal echoed behind them. A towering figure emerged from the smoke. A hunter-killer unit. The machine stood nearly 3 meters tall, its body sleek and insect-like. Its optical scanners glowed red, analyzing the battlefield. Twin plasma cannons hummed to life on its arms. It had locked onto them. Zalrax recognized the model. It was Zephyr technology, one of their most advanced killing machines. Against it, a single wounded human and a crippled warrior had no chance. Daniel knew it too, but he didn't stop. The bunker was just a few meters away. The hunter-killer raised its cannons. It fired. A blue plasma bolt screamed through the air. Daniel barely had time to react. He twisted his body, throwing himself forward. The blast missed by inches, melting the ground behind them. They crashed inside the bunker. Daniel hit the floor hard, Zalrax's heavy form rolling beside him. His ears rang. His vision blurred. The taste of smoke filled his mouth. The hunter-killer marched closer, scanning the entrance. Its mechanical voice echoed. Survivors detected. Terminate. Daniel's mind raced. The bunker wouldn't hold. The doors were weak, the walls crumbling. The machine would tear through in seconds. Zalrax, still weak, lifted his head. There should be an emergency exit, he gasped. Daniel's gaze snapped to him. Where? Zalrax pointed toward the back of the bunker, a small hatch, half covered by debris. Their only way out. But the hunter-killer was already charging its weapons. Daniel grabbed his rifle and set it to overload. He had one chance. He turned to Zalrax. Can you crawl? The Sci-Fi warrior clenched his teeth, pushing himself forward with his arms. It was slow, painful, but he moved. Daniel yanked a grenade from his belt, pulling the pin. He took a deep breath, then hurled it straight at the hunter-killer's feet. A second later, an explosion ripped through the entrance. Dust and smoke filled the bunker. The machine staggered, its sensors disrupted for a moment. That was all the time they needed. Daniel grabbed Zalrax and shoved him through the hatch. Then he dove in after him, sealing the door just as the hunter-killer's plasma cannons fired again. The shot hit the bunker. The entire structure collapsed in on itself. But Daniel and Zalrax were already gone. The chase begins. The bunker was falling apart. Cracks ran along the steel walls. Dust rained down from the ceiling, and the air was thick with smoke. Inside, Sergeant Daniel Hayes pressed his back against the door, his breath coming fast. General Zalrax lay beside him, his massive form barely fitting in the confined space. Outside, the hunter-killer unit stood like an executioner. Boom! The metal door shook violently as the machine slammed its fist against it. A deep dent appeared in the steel. Zalrax, still paralyzed from the waist down, turned his head toward the human. That door will not hold. Daniel wiped the sweat from his brow. Yeah, figured that out. Boom! Another impact. This time, the top hinges snapped, leaving the door barely hanging on. Daniel's mind raced. There was no way they could fight that thing. Even if he had a full squad of soldiers, it would be a death sentence. The Sci-Fi hunter-killers were designed for one thing: eliminating survivors. They never stopped, never hesitated. And now one was right outside. Think, Hayes, Daniel muttered to himself. He scanned the bunker, looking for an exit. His eyes landed on a grate in the floor, barely visible under debris. A maintenance tunnel. Zalrax followed his gaze. You think we can fit through that? Daniel grabbed a metal pipe, wedging it under the grate. I don't think. I act. He yanked the grate open, revealing a narrow tunnel leading into darkness. Another boom. The door bent inward, sparks flying from the edges. The hunter-killer was almost through. Daniel turned to Zalrax. Can you move your arms? Zalrax scowled. I am not a corpse yet. Good, Daniel said. Then start crawling. Zalrax hesitated. Crawling. Like an animal. The thought burned his pride, but pride wouldn't keep him alive. Gritting his teeth, he dragged himself forward, using his powerful arms to slide toward the tunnel. The movement was slow, agonizing, but he pushed on. Daniel followed close behind, gripping his rifle tight. As they reached the tunnel entrance, the bunker door finally gave in. Crash. Metal screeched. The bunker filled with smoke and debris as the hunter-killer stepped inside. Its optical sensors glowed red as it scanned the room, looking for its prey. It saw the open grate. And then it moved. "Go, go, go," Daniel hissed, shoving Salrax forward. The tunnel was tight and dark, lined with rusted pipes and loose cables. Salrax dragged himself with his upper body, his claws scraping against the cold steel. Daniel crawled behind him, every nerve on edge. Then, a mechanical whirring noise. Daniel's stomach dropped. The hunter-killer wasn't giving up. It was shrinking its body, compressing itself into a smaller form to fit into the tunnel. "No way," Daniel whispered. Salrax glanced back. "Your enemy is persistent." "Yeah, well, persistence is a pain in my ass," Daniel muttered. They had to move faster. The tunnel stretched ahead, leading deeper underground. Daniel's mind raced. These old bunkers were built decades ago, and some had secret escape routes. But could they reach one before the machine caught them? A loud metallic screech echoed behind them. The hunter-killer had entered the tunnel. Daniel risked a glance over his shoulder. The machine was crawling forward, its limbs folding unnaturally, its red sensors glowing in the dark. It moved like a spider, its fingers digging into the walls for traction. And it was gaining on them. Daniel grabbed a grenade, pulling the pin with his teeth. "You better keep moving," he growled. Salrax pulled himself forward, grunting with effort. Daniel rolled the grenade behind him. Boom! The explosion shook the tunnel, filling it with smoke and shrapnel. A metallic screech of pain came from behind as the hunter-killer was temporarily blinded. But it was still coming. "We need a way out, now," Daniel snapped. Salrax's eyes darted ahead. There, a faint light glowed at the end of the tunnel. A hatch. Daniel surged forward, pushing Salrax ahead. Almost there. Behind them, the hunter-killer moved faster, now leaping forward in short bursts. It was seconds away. Salrax reached the hatch first. He slammed his fist against it, but it wouldn't budge. It stuck. Daniel lunged forward, ramming his shoulder against it. The hatch groaned but still wouldn't open. The hunter-killer reached for them. Its clawed hand swept. Daniel ducked. The metal fingers missed his face by inches. With a final roar, Daniel slammed his boot against the hatch. It burst open. Daylight blinded them. Without thinking, Daniel grabbed Salrax and pulled him through. They tumbled out into the ruins of an abandoned train station. Rusted tracks stretched into the distance. The bunker tunnels had led them to an old transit hub. Daniel gasped for breath. "We're alive." Salrax grunted. "For now." Then, a deep rumble from below. Daniel's eyes widened. "Oh, come on." The hunter-killer was climbing out. Its metallic form emerged from the tunnel, smoke and dust swirling around it. It locked eyes with Daniel and Salrax. And then it began to sprint. Daniel's pulse exploded. "Run," he shouted. He grabbed Salrax, hauling him forward. The hunter-killer charged after them. It was no longer a chase. It was a final hunt. Unlikely allies. The ruins of the abandoned train station stretched in all directions, a graveyard of rusted tracks and crumbling concrete. Broken pillars jutted into the sky like jagged teeth, and the wind howled through shattered windows. Once, this place had been alive with movement. Now, it was nothing but dust and echoes. And death was coming fast. Behind them, the hunter-killer sprinted forward, its mechanical joints hissing with every step. Its glowing red optics locked onto its prey. Sergeant Daniel Hayes and General Zalrax. It wasn't just chasing them. It was hunting them. Daniel's legs burned as he ran, half-dragging Zalrax along. The Sci-Fi warrior, still paralyzed from the waist down, used his massive arms to pull himself forward, his claws digging into the cracked pavement. "This is humiliating," Zalrax growled between labored breaths. Daniel gritted his teeth. "You can complain. After we're not dead." The hunter-killer gained ground, its metal feet crushing old train tracks beneath its weight. Then, a high-pitched whirring sound. Daniel glanced back just in time to see the machine's arms split open, revealing a plasma cannon. His stomach twisted. It was about to fire. "Get down," Daniel shouted. He threw himself to the ground, pulling Zalrax with him. A plasma bolt roared overhead, smashing into an old control tower. The explosion sent glass and steel raining down, narrowly missing them. Daniel cursed under his breath. No cover. Nowhere to run. His eyes darted across the station, looking for anything that could save them. Then he saw it. An old cargo train, rusted but intact, resting on the tracks ahead. Its power lines were still connected. Daniel's mind raced. If they could start the train, they could escape. "Zalrax," he panted, pointing. "That train, does it look Sci-Fi built?" Zalrax, still dragging himself forward, glanced at it. His reptilian eyes narrowed. "Yes, older model. Might still work. Then we need to move now." Daniel hoisted Zalrax onto his shoulders, ignoring the burning pain in his muscles. The alien was heavy, but right now, there was no other choice. The hunter-killer's targeting system beeped. It locked on again. Daniel sprinted toward the train, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The hunter-killer fired. Boom! The ground behind them erupted, sending dust and metal into the air. The shockwave nearly knocked Daniel off his feet. He threw himself forward, crashing into the side of the train. With shaking hands, he reached for the train's control panel. His fingers flew over the buttons, searching for anything that still had power. The console flickered to life. "Zalrax, talk to me," Daniel gasped. "How do I start this thing?" The Sci-Fi general, still breathing heavily, hauled himself into the cabin, using his arms to lift his body. He stared at the controls, his mind working fast. "This is an older Sci-Fi system," Zalrax muttered. "It requires an activation sequence." Daniel clenched his jaw. "And what the hell does that mean?" "It means..." Zalrax pressed a button, and the train's engine rumbled to life. "You need to protect me while I start it." Daniel turned toward the station entrance. The hunter-killer had arrived. It paused, analyzing the situation. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, it stepped onto the train tracks. Daniel raised his rifle. The machine charge. Daniel opened fire. His bullets bounced off its armor, barely leaving scratches. The hunter-killer barely slowed. It knew it had already won. Zalrax worked as fast as his broken body would allow, his claws moving over the control panel. "Almost there," he muttered. Daniel threw a grenade. Boom! The explosion sent the hunter-killer staggering, but it quickly recalibrated. Then it leaped. Daniel's eyes widened. The machine soared through the air, aiming straight for them. "Xalrax," Daniel roared. "Done." Zalrax slammed his fist onto the final switch. The train lurched forward. The hunter-killer crashed onto the roof of the train, digging its claws into the metal. The entire train shook violently. "We're moving, but we're not safe yet," Zalrax said. Daniel reloaded his rifle. "Yeah, no kidding." The hunter-killer tore into the roof, trying to get inside. Its metal fingers punched through the ceiling, reaching for them. Daniel grabbed his last grenade, pulled the pin, and threw it straight into the hunter-killer's open chest cavity. Boom! The machine let out a screech, its body shuddering. Sparks erupted from its core. It stumbled, trying to recalibrate. Then, the train hit full speed. and the hunter-killer was thrown off. It tumbled across the tracks, its metal body crashing into debris. The train sped into the distance, leaving the machine behind. Silence. Daniel collapsed against the wall, his breath ragged. That was too close. Zalrax, still lying on the floor, let out a rough chuckle. Your species is insane. Daniel smirked. Yeah, but we get the job done. For the first time in his life, Zalrax didn't know what to think. He had spent his whole life believing in strength, in power, in leaving behind the weak. Yet here was a human, a sworn enemy, who had risked everything to save him. Why? He didn't know. But as the train sped away from the ruins, one thing was certain. His war wasn't over yet. And neither was Daniel's. Fighting back, the train thundered forward, its rusted wheels screaming against the ancient tracks. Dust and wind howled through the shattered windows, carrying the scent of burnt metal and blood. Inside the cabin, Sergeant Daniel Hayes sat on the floor, his back pressed against the cold steel. His chest rose and fell heavily, the adrenaline still burning in his veins. They had survived. Barely. Across from him, General Zalrax lay motionless, his massive alien form sprawled across the floor. His 4 powerful arms were trembling, his scales slick with sweat. His breathing was labored. Daniel wiped blood from his forehead and let out a slow, relieved breath. Well, that sucked. Zalrax let out a rough chuckle. Your species thrives on chaos. Daniel smirked. Keeps life interesting. For a moment, there was silence. Only the rhythmic clanking of the train wheels echoed through the hollow remains of the world outside. For the first time since this hellish battle began, it felt like they had a chance. But it didn't last. A sudden metallic screech filled the air. Daniel's stomach twisted. He looked up. Through the cracked ceiling, he could see a shadow moving outside the train. Something was still up there. He grabbed his rifle and crawled toward the window. Carefully, he peeked outside. And his heart nearly stopped. The hunter-killer wasn't dead. The explosion had damaged it, but not destroyed it. It had latched onto the back of the train, its twisted metal limbs clawing along the roof, dragging itself forward inch by inch. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. You've got to be kidding me. Zalrax noticed his expression. What is it? Daniel pointed. Zalrax followed his gaze, then his reptilian eyes widened. The hunter-killer was coming for them. Again. Zalrax clenched his jaw. That machine is relentless. Daniel cursed under his breath. And I'm all out of grenades. The train car shuddered violently as the hunter-killer's claws tore through the roof, ripping metal apart like paper. Sparks rained down. Daniel's mind raced. They couldn't outrun it. They couldn't escape. That left one option. They had to fight. The last stand. Daniel slammed a fresh magazine into his rifle, chambered around, and turned to Zalrax. I need you to do something for me. Zalrax narrowed his eyes. I am not in a position to fight, human. Yeah, I know, Daniel said quickly. But I don't need you to fight. I need you to think. Zalrax scowled. Explain. You're a Sci-Fi general. You've fought wars. You know how these machines work, right? Zalrax hesitated. For the first time, a human was asking him for strategy. His pride bristled, but he nodded. The hunter-killer's core processor is inside its chest cavity, Zalrax said, but it is heavily armored. Your weapons will not penetrate it directly. Daniel gritted his teeth. Figures. Zalrax's mind worked fast. There had to be a way. He studied the train car. His eyes flickered to the electrical conduits running along the walls. And then, an idea formed. There is a way, Zalrax said, but it is dangerous. Daniel raised an eyebrow. More dangerous than this. He gestured to the death machine, crawling toward them. Zalrax ignored him. The power grid of this train is still partially active. If we can overload the system, we might be able to send a surge powerful enough to disrupt the hunter-killer's core processor. Daniel's eyes widened. You mean electrocute the damn thing? Yes. Daniel looked around. The train's control panel was still active, flickering with weak lights. If he could rewire the power surge, it might just work. The problem? He had to buy time. Daniel slammed a fresh mag into his rifle and climbed toward the back of the train car. Work fast, he told Xalarax. I'll keep it busy. Before Xalarax could protest, Daniel kicked open the emergency hatch and climbed onto the roof. Battle on the roof. The wind howled as Daniel pulled himself up onto the moving train. The tracks below blurred as the train sped forward, carrying them into the unknown. And there, crawling along the roof like a nightmare of metal and rage, the hunter-killer. It was damaged, but not broken. Sparks flickered from its chest. Its red optics glowed with fury. Daniel raised his rifle and opened fire. Bullets ripped into the machine, sparking against its armor. It staggered, but quickly recalibrated. Then it lunged. Daniel rolled to the side just in time, barely avoiding a razor-sharp metal claw. The machine swung again. Daniel ducked, but the claw sliced across his shoulder. Pain exploded through his arm. Blood soaked his uniform, but he gritted his teeth and kept moving. Then, a voice crackled through his earpiece. It is ready. Xalarax. Daniel's heart pounded. He had one shot at this. The hunter-killer charge. At the last second, Daniel dove to the side, grabbed a loose electrical cable from the train system, and jammed it straight into the hunter-killer's chest. The kill shot. Electricity roared. The hunter-killer screamed. Its entire body seized, red optics flickering violently. Sparks erupted from its joints as thousands of volts surged through its frame. The machine convulsed, then collapsed onto the train roof. Its optics flickered, then died. The hunter-killer was finally dead. Daniel pulled the smoking cable away, breathing heavily. His whole body ached. His shoulder burned where the machine had cut him. But they had won. Aftermath. Daniel climbed back into the cabin, dropping down next to Xalarax. Well, he muttered, that was fun. Xalarax smirked. Your definition of fun is questionable, human. Daniel chuckled. Then he leaned back, finally allowing himself to breathe. For the first time, Xalarax studied him closely. This human had saved him, fought for him, risked his life over and over again. Why? Xalarax didn't know. But one thing was certain. He owed this human his life. And for a Sci-Fi general, that meant a debt that must be repaid. The betrayal. The train rumbled forward, cutting through the ruined landscape like a rusted dagger slicing into the unknown. Smoke curled in the distance, and the skies were heavy with dark clouds. The air smelled of burning metal, blood, and war, the scent of a battlefield long lost. Inside the cabin, Sergeant Daniel Hayes sat against the wall, his chest rising and falling in slow, heavy breaths. His body ached. His uniform was torn. His shoulder throbbed where the hunter-killer had cut him. Across from him, General Xalarax remained still, his massive body slumped against the console. His 4 arms rested on his lap, and for the first time since they had met, his eyes didn't burn with defiance. Instead, they carried something else. Thought, confusion, and perhaps respect. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, Daniel let out a tired laugh. Well, that sucked. Xalarax huffed. Your people have strange definitions of victory, human. Daniel smirked. Hey, we're still breathing, aren't we? Xalarax glanced at the scorch marks on Daniel's uniform, the blood caking his shoulder. Barely. Daniel shrugged. Good enough for me. The train groaned as it hit a bend in the tracks, shaking violently. Ahead, through the cracked windows, something appeared in the sky. Daniel's face hardened. You seeing this? Zalrax turned his head. Then his eyes widened. Hovering above the landscape, a Sci-Fi warship loomed like a black specter against the storm clouds. Its hull shimmered with energy, and its massive cannons pulsed with a familiar, ominous glow. It was not a rescue ship. It was an executioner. Daniel's heart pounded. Tell me that's not what I think it is. Zalrax clenched his jaw. It is. Daniel exhaled sharply. So, they're not here for a pickup. Zalrax let out a bitter laugh. No, they are here to erase my failure. Daniel's stomach twisted. Zalrax's own people were coming to kill him. And by extension, kill him too. The call of death. A deep metallic voice echoed through the train's radio. General Zalrax. The words were cold, devoid of emotion. You should not have survived. Zalrax exhaled slowly. Commander Vextal, he murmured. I should have known. Daniel's fingers twitched near his rifle. Friend of yours. Former second in command. Zalrax muttered. It appears he has taken my place. The radio crackled again. You were a great warrior once, but you are broken now, and the Sci-Fi do not suffer the broken. Daniel rolled his eyes. Man, your people have some serious loyalty issues. Zalrax ignored him. He sat up straighter, his eyes burning once more with defiance. So, this is how it ends, he said into the radio. You will kill one of your own. You are no longer one of us. Then, the warship's cannons began to glow. It was charging to fire. A desperate escape. Daniel's pulse exploded. They're gonna blast the whole damn train. Zalrax gritted his teeth. Then we jump. Daniel blinked. Jump? Off a moving train. That's your grand plan. Zalrax met his gaze. Do you have a better one? Daniel glanced at the approaching warship, the glow of its cannons intensifying. Then he muttered under his breath, damn it. He grabbed Zalrax, hoisting the alien onto his back again. His legs screamed in protest, but there was no time to hesitate. They stumbled toward the back of the train. The warship's cannons reached full charge. Daniel didn't think. He jumped. For a terrifying second, they were airborne. Then, they hit the ground hard. Daniel rolled across the rocky terrain, feeling his ribs rattle. Zalrax groaned beside him, his heavy form crashing against the dirt. And then, the world exploded. The warship's cannons fired, and in an instant, the train was erased. A massive fireball consumed the tracks, the shockwave knocking Daniel and Zalrax deeper into the ruins. Smoke and dust clouded everything. For a moment, all was silent. Then, the whirring sound of approaching Sci-Fi drones filled the air. The last stand. Daniel coughed, pushing himself up. His hands shook, his whole body aching. Zalrax groaned beside him, his forearms digging into the dirt. We cannot outrun them, he muttered. Daniel nodded. Yeah, guess we make our stand here. He pulled out his last 2 magazines, quickly loading his rifle. Zalrax glanced at him. You still fight, even when the odds are hopeless. Daniel smirked, rolling his shoulders. You don't know humans very well, do you? Then, the Sci-Fi drones arrived. Daniel opened fire. The first drone exploded midair, but 2 more zipped around, firing plasma bolts that melted the ground near his feet. Zalrax, gritting his teeth, grabbed a fallen Sci-Fi rifle from the wreckage. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Thought you were paralyzed. Zalrax smirked. Not in my arms. Then he fired, taking down a drone with a single precise shot. Daniel let out a laugh. Not bad, big guy. But more drones were coming, and the warship was still hovering above, waiting for the right moment to finish them off. The turning point. Then, something unexpected happened. A new transmission crackled through the radio. To the human soldier and the Sci-Fi exile. Do you require assistance? Daniel and Zalrax exchanged looks. The voice continued. "This is Captain Elias Carter of the United Earth Forces. We are inbound for extraction." Daniel's eyes lit up. "Well, Dan," he breathed. "Looks like we're not dead yet." Zolrax looked at him, something shifting behind his gaze. A choice was forming in his mind. For the first time in his life, he was not fighting for the Sci-Fi Empire. He was fighting with a human. And now, humanity was coming to save him. The warship prepared its final shot. But the humans were coming. The battle wasn't over yet. The final stand and redemption. The battlefield was a storm of chaos. Above, the Sci-Fi warship hovered like a god of destruction, its massive cannons humming with deadly energy. The drones darted through the sky like mechanical hornets, their weapons slicing through the air with bright streaks of plasma. The ruins around them smoldered from the train's destruction, fire and dust rising into the darkening sky. On the ground, Sergeant Daniel Hayes and General Zolrax stood back to back, their weapons raised, outnumbered, outgunned, but still fighting. And for the first time in his life, Zolrax wasn't fighting for the Sci-Fi Empire. He was fighting with a human. The human reinforcements arrive. A thunderous roar cut through the battlefield. Daniel looked up. From the clouds, Earth's warships descended like falling meteors. Their sleek, armored hulls reflected the fire below, their weapons glowing with charged energy. Fighter jets swooped down, unleashing volleys of missile fire that exploded through the Sci-Fi drones. The sky erupted into a full-scale battle. And then, through the radio, "Sergeant Hayes, do you read?" Daniel grinned. "Loud and clear, Captain Carter. We've got eyes on you. Hold tight. Extraction in 2 minutes." Daniel reloaded his rifle. "You hear that, big guy? We just have to survive 2 more minutes." Zolrax growled, raising his stolen Sci-Fi rifle. "Then let us make them count." The last battle begins. The Sci-Fi warship shifted position, adjusting for a direct firing angle. Its primary cannon charged, the glow intensifying as it prepared to unleash a devastating strike. Daniel's blood ran cold. If that cannon fired, everything would be erased. "Carter," Daniel shouted. "They're about to fire their main gun. We see it. We're moving in." But Daniel knew they wouldn't make it in time. The Sci-Fi drones rushed forward, attacking relentlessly. Daniel and Zolrax fought side by side, taking down drone after drone. Plasma fire streaked past their heads. Daniel ducked, rolled, and fired in perfect rhythm, while Zolrax used his 4 powerful arms to dual-wield Sci-Fi rifles, cutting through the enemies with deadly precision. But the warship cannon was still charging. And then, Zolrax made his decision. The choice that changed everything. Zolrax's eyes locked onto the warship above. His people had abandoned him. His people had tried to erase him. And yet, a human had fought for him, had saved him, had treated him as an equal. For the first time in his life, Zolrax understood the meaning of honor. He turned to Daniel. "I am ending this." Daniel blinked. "What? What do you mean?" Before he could stop him, Zolrax sprinted forward. Despite his crippled legs, he threw himself toward the wreckage of a fallen Sci-Fi drone. His claws ripped through its core, pulling free an unstable plasma reactor. It was volatile, dangerous, a bomb waiting to happen. Zolrax hoisted it onto his shoulder. Daniel's eyes widened. "No." Zolrax gave him one last look. "This is my choice, human." Then he ran straight for the Sci-Fi warship. A warrior's redemption. The Sci-Fi warship locked onto him immediately. "General Zolrax, stand down." But he didn't stop. The drone swarmed him, but Zolrax fired back with pinpoint precision, taking down every last one in his path. The warship hesitated. It didn't know how to react. Zolrax roared, using his last strength to hurl the unstable reactor toward the warship's core. The ship's defense systems activated, trying to shoot it down. Too late. The reactor collided with the warship's energy core. And then, the sky turned white. A massive explosion engulfed the warship, flames erupting through its hull. Metal tore apart, the ship splitting in half as it lost control. Daniel watched, his heart pounding, as the massive vessel collapsed from the sky, crashing into the wasteland below in a fireball of destruction. Silence fell. The Zephyr were defeated. The aftermath. Daniel ran toward the wreckage. Smoke and flames rose into the sky. The ruins of the warship scattered across the battlefield. Then, movement. Daniel's breath caught. Through the flames, a tall, battered figure emerged. Zalrax was still alive. His body was burned and broken, but he stood tall. The survivor. A warrior. Daniel let out a breath of relief. Dan, big guy, you really don't know how to quit, do you? Zalrax let out a deep, ragged laugh. Neither do you, human. The Earth warships landed nearby. Troops rushed out, securing the area. Captain Carter approached, his sharp eyes landing on Zalrax. This the Zephyr you were traveling with? Carter asked. Daniel nodded. Yeah, and he just saved all of our asses. Carter studied Zalrax for a long moment. Then he extended his hand. You fought well, he said simply. Welcome to humanity's side. Zalrax hesitated. Then he took Carter's hand. A new beginning. As the Earth forces moved in, securing the battlefield, Zalrax turned to Daniel. I am no longer Zephyr, he said. Daniel smirked. So what are you now? Zalrax exhaled. For the first time in his life, he was free. He met Daniel's gaze. I am one of you. Daniel grinned. Then let's get you a new home. As the Earth forces prepared to leave, one thing was certain. This was not the end of Zalrax's story. It was only the beginning. The end.